Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of WiLSWorld Shorts. Really excited today to welcome Beth Tomez. She's going to be telling us how to tell our library story today. I'm going to do a quick introduction, but during the presentation, if you have questions or comments that you'd like to share, go ahead and use chat. I'll be monitoring that and I'll make sure that Beth sees them. Otherwise, you can save your questions to the end, unmute, and we can have a couple minutes conversation at the end. Do it however you like. So I get the pleasure of introducing Beth today. Beth joined DPI's Library Services team in July of 2021 and directs data and communications work. Prior to that, she served as DPI's Director of Communications under former State Superintendent Carolyn Stanford Taylor. She came to DPI from Illinois, where she worked as the Acting Director of Communications for the governor. And before being called to the governor's office, she ran her own PR and public affairs firm supporting communications needs for organizations of all sizes, including Coca-Cola. Elizabeth began her career as a producer and a video editor for WCIA, WNIT, and WNDU TV, and as an executive producer for Fox News Chicago. She has Bachelor of Arts degrees in political science and English from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and an MBA from the Kellstadt Graduate School of Business at DePaul University. She's married with 2 daughters who love to go to the library with their mom. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining me today for the WiLSWorld of Short session, telling your library story. As Andy just said, I am Beth Tomez with the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, and it's wonderful to be here today with all of you. In this session, I plan to share some tips on how to create story ideas and share those stories with the public. So all of your great stories, trying to get the word out and let people hear more about all the wonderful things you do. But first, I'm gonna quickly tell you about my story that Andy kind of briefed you on and how I came to work with libraries. So as she mentioned, I was a TV news producer. So I actually started off my career in television doing anything and everything, from building sets to lighting, to creating graphics, running cameras on the shoulder, in the studio. I did audio, I directed, I edited, I wrote, but mainly I produced. What producing is creating the newscast and determining which stories are going to be told, in what order, when, and where, and all of that. And everything that is part of it. So it's like pulling all the elements together to create that story. And so I did that all the way through to the #3 market in the nation in Chicago, where I finished up as an executive news producer. So I got to the end, as far as I could move up in Chicago as an executive news producer, and decided what was I going to do next. So was I going to become a news director and go to a smaller market, go up to New York and work with network news? I didn't want to move anymore, so I kind of was done and transitioned. I still like the type of work I did, and enjoying coming up with making sure people knew information, letting other people's stories be told, but making sure information was getting in the hands of others so that they could make decisions for themselves. It's always been something I've always been interested in, something that I always felt was such an important need in society. So as I transitioned as Andy had referred to, that I started my own PR public affairs firm, where I worked with all sorts of sizes of clients, including a mom and pop gardening store, helping them get the word out about that they would be selling flowers and shrubs and all that in the springtime in the Jewel parking lot, and helping them promote their information, all the way up to large Fortune 100 companies. And while the specifics might be a little different, the goal was always the same. It was telling the positive stories and helping reframe what it is, what service, what product, what information, what event that a client wanted to tell. But it was always the same typical work, just different content in each. And then I transitioned because I got a phone call from the chief of staff for the governor of Illinois, who had asked if I'd help out. And at first I thought, okay, sure, you want a press release or two, I'm happy to help out, give you some assistance. And then they asked, no, could you please come on full time and just actually be part of the senior executive communications team. That took a little changing because I had kind of pulled back because I had 2 young daughters at the time, and I had actually slowed down my business. And so kind of flipped careers on its head. My husband pulled back to part-time. I went to full-time and directed communications for the governor of Illinois, which, as you can understand, was probably, 80-hour plus work weeks. And when that term was over, because we had the agreement in our family that was one term and done because of the amount of need that's needed for a position like that. And we switched, and I moved over, stayed in public service, and switched to the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, where, as Andy had mentioned, I previously worked for Carolyn Stanford Taylor's administration as her director of communications for DPI. And then when the new administration came in, I switched over to promoting libraries and working for the library services team. And again, common theme of my career is helping tell a story. And so today I'm here to help you tell your stories. And so part of today's discussion, I'm going to go over, the story, what it is, what should you be looking for in telling your story, tools that you might have available or need to obtain to tell your story properly. And then planning when to tell your story. How do you know when to do it? Where to do it? What should you be talking about? How often should you be telling a story? So again, I do encourage anyone, if you've got questions along the way while I'm in this discussion with you today, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer something like on the spot if it pertains to a certain slide or whatever, or if you feel more comfortable at the end, that's okay too, to put in the chat or open up your mics and ask me. I'm happy either way. It doesn't bother me. I just want to make sure that you guys have the information that you need and is most helpful to you. So let's get started. Why tell your story? What do you think? There's lots of reasons why. Many of you know, could be just building brand awareness, letting the public know that your library exists and why they should use it. You want to serve your community. And so in order to do that, the community needs to know that you exist and you have services. So promote your library resources that you have available. Let them know how they can benefit from using the library. Legislators want to know what you're doing with their taxpayer dollars, right? They're sending funds to you at times. What are you doing with it? Celebrate those successes. Let people know that it's working, all the great things that you're doing. And there are plenty. If COVID did nothing else, while all the negatives that happened with COVID, the one positive, it stressed how important libraries are to the communities and all the great work that all of our public libraries and our school libraries did throughout the state and throughout the nation, is helping people connect to those resources in times where they couldn't connect to very many things. And it provided Wi-Fi to those who couldn't. It provided other social services that other areas were not able to. And so there were many successes here, and hopefully people were able to see that. I do feel like many more saw it than in the past, and I haven't seen as many library stories as I have in the last year and a half or 2 years since prior to that. There's always been some, but a lot of things were highlighted, and that's a testament to all the great work you've been doing. So another reason why, and this isn't always what we want, but sometimes there's issues. It could be the material challenges that are popping up or something, and someone is criticizing the work of a library, some of the work that's happening, and you need to tell your side of the story. This is another reason why to tell your story, is because you need to set the record straight and let everyone know the good that you're doing. So those are some reasons. There are others that you could add to it, but these are probably the main ones that we'd be working on and why you should tell your story. So now you decide, what story should I tell? Okay, I'm ready to do this. So where do I start? Sometimes people are all ready and say, I have like 15 ready to go. What do I want to talk about first? And others might be nervous, like, well, I just do average everyday work. What's the big deal? And they sell themselves short, thinking that there isn't a story to tell. And when someone is feeling that way, I'm always reminded of a CBS reporter I used to tell my journalism students when I taught back at Loyola University and Columbia College University in Chicago. And there used to be this CBS reporter, Steve Hartman. He worked for network CBS News. And he always did this series where they just talked about a random everyday person. And there was always a great story tied to that person. And how they determined who they talked to, he would throw a dart at a map, randomly pick a name out of a phone book, and do a news story on whomever he chose. So you can tell this is a while back when we're talking about phone books and all that. But he would just pick it out, and never once did he have to back out of that story. Every person he came in contact with had an interesting story to tell, and it always ran on CBS News in the evening. That series went on for 7 years until he was ready to end it, not because the network needed to. And so I always think back to that. If ever anyone thinks, well, there's nothing to tell, there's always a story. Someone always has a story. Your libraries have plenty of stories to tell. So with that being said, what makes a story newsworthy? And I like to go and take it back to thinking like a journalist. What makes an event newsworthy? Is it timeliness, meaning that it's happening right now? Because if it's something that happened 2-3 weeks ago and you're just getting around to it now, maybe you should just not do it this time around. And maybe the next time, if it's an annual event or something, it should be told when it's happening. Because if it's dated, most people wouldn't be interested after the fact. And the media outlets aren't going to cover it if it's already past due, or they don't have enough time to get to it, or if it doesn't make sense in the calendar year. So make sure that it's timely. Is it happening nearby? Is it an event that's happening within your community? Then that's what you want to talk about. If it's obviously, if it's a story that's in your library, you want to promote it within the community, and the media can cover that because it's helping the community there. So proximity is key. If it's something that, oh, you think a great idea, but it's happening 3 states over, I'll promote it too, to talk about, just to help out that other library. It's really not going to affect your local community. So it's probably not necessary to waste the time and energy on that portion, right? But obviously local things that are happening or something that's coming through town, that would be relevant. And if it's unique. Now, I always love these, I always love the book machines and the vending machines. I always think it's so creative. And this particular one is Sherman Elementary School. And if you click on the source for that, when you get these slides later, that is always a neat idea to me. I find it unique, and it always ends up making news when the local schools get one, or a public library gets something similar to this, because of how cool it is that a child gets to earn he has some incentive to do something good, he or she, and puts a coin in the slot because they've done a great deed, and then they get a book in return. And so how wonderful is that? It's always a positive, happy story, but it's unique to the area at the time. So that always makes a great story, and something unique in your area would make something newsworthy. And then prominence. If you have some high known person coming into town, let's say Tom Cruise that we put on the screen here, if he's walking in and wants to just do story time with your little ones and read Richard Scarry's Planes, let him do it. Ask for permission, do some social media. I promise you, and this is one of the few promises that I will make, you will go viral if he walks in. But in all seriousness, if you have someone who's on the higher end, like maybe you have someone from the Green Bay Packers coming in to help out with an event, and all that will bring in media to cover an event and bring you more attention for that. So prominence is another reason to talk about it, and that something could be newsworthy and gain attention for you. So that might be a story worth doing. Also impact. Is it going to affect your community? We all know of all the tragedies that are happening over in Ukraine right now. Well, maybe your community has a large size Ukrainian area, or maybe you've had some of the refugees come here, and there are some services or something that might benefit that area, or some information for that. That impacts your community. They're interested in that. That might be something that is newsworthy. So that in itself also should be considered. And then conflict, good or bad, when people disagree, that makes news. And it's not always what we want or hope for, but that might be something that thrusts us into the news. So it might be something that we need to cover, or potentially get information out on, of something that is difficult to tackle. And maybe it's a subject matter that people are interested in because of that conflict. And that might be something where we can provide resources to get the right information out there. Because just like journalists, libraries are providing information, good or bad, they're providing the facts, the information that people can get answers correctly. And so this is another way to do that. So there might be a story around there. And then finally, number 7 is human interest. It doesn't matter of your race, your religion, where you come from, your wealth, or anything. These are the type of stories that everyone has a common bound to. So whether you like dogs or cats or whatever, this picture, when you see it on the screen of this dog here, he's going to make you smile. You know, you don't have to pet him. He's not going to lick you. Don't have to worry about it. But it's a cute little story that probably at least puts a mini smile on your face. And that happens to everyone, no matter where they come from. These are the types of stories that grab everyone's attention and is usually heartwarming and helpful. And these are great stories, and they grab a lot of attention, and it usually remains on people's minds that they'll remember this for a while. So human interest stories are also something that's newsworthy. So now, how do we tell this story? We need tools. We need tools in our communications toolbox, and you have many of them, and it's going to vary from library to library, system to system, and all that. My tools are even different than what I've used in several different areas. So they might be a press release that you have the option to send, social media. I'm pretty sure everyone in this meeting today would have a social media presence. If not, that's okay. There are other tools, but that's probably something that you likely have. PSAs, which are public service announcements, that's also an option. A press conference for something that's a larger event that you need to speak to. Your library website is key. It's probably your most valuable communications tool, because that's where everyone is going to look to find out when and where certain events are, how they find the resources, what resources their local library might have. So your website is key. And then blog and newsletters and marketing materials. So we'll talk a little bit about each of these. I'll give a little more heavy attention to the press release and social media, but I won't be, and then I'll give a little bit later. So now we have Sarah Copeland that you see on the left side there, the Shorewood Intermediate School teacher. She was named one of the 5 Wisconsin Teachers of the Year by the DPI, and she received the award back in May. It was a surprise ceremony from the state superintendent that you see pictured there, and she was in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. How we usually promote this, because this is an annual thing that we do here at DPI, is there is usually a media. So we have like a media alert that sends out that lets people know where the state superintendent is going to be and what the topic is going to be about. And then it's followed up by the press release with some visuals and links to information so that the media has all that they need to cover this kind of story. And then in addition to that, you know, we follow up with our own, so with social media, and then other follow-ups on our own web pages to promote each one of the Teachers of the Year. And we do this each year. And then there's certain events that are held throughout the year to promote these Teachers of the Year, so they're not forgotten right after they win the award. There's other events that they take part in and participate in throughout the year, including writing guest editorials and all that. So that just promotes their Teacher of the Year status, but also their special studies. So in this particular instance, there's a geography teacher. We also have a library studies, and a library media specialist, and others who are some of the winners. And then that's kind of the information that they highlight throughout the year, which then brings in DPI each time they're talked about as a Teacher of the Year. So that's kind of how that grows and grows over time using multiple tools. Another story that I'm going to touch on a couple times during this session today is, as you see there by Madeline Fox from WPR, did a story on Wisconsin libraries and the ARPA funds and the creative ways that libraries were using, the school libraries were using these throughout the state. And so as we switch to that, I'm going to shift over to who should hear my story. So as you're thinking of stories to tell, then you have to determine who should hear it though, because you might have a story to tell, but maybe that's not going to resonate with the people that you need to hear it. And again, it won't be helpful for your library. You want to make sure that you're reaching the people who need to hear the story. So who's your audience? And that's going to depend on your topic each time. It might be different. It might not be the same audience for each message you send out. So it could be library users. Maybe you're trying to reach community members who don't use the library and you want them to start using it. Maybe if it's a stakeholder, or maybe you're trying to reach DPI and you want us to see the great things that you're seeing, or legislators, because we're getting close to, we're in budget talks. You want to know you want to make sure that they know what a great job that you're doing. So keep them in mind as you write your copy, and you're putting out your library displays or putting up your posters or you're setting up programming. Always keep your audience in mind. All right, so how do we tell a story? We go back to our journalism ways again. So think like a journalist at times, and you don't have to go to school for all this. I'm going to just tell you the few little secrets that are there. So just kind of quickly shift your mind a little bit to the 5 W's and the H. And you probably already know what these are from school days and all that, but it's the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Those are your 5 W's and H. And if you deliver those when you're trying to pitch a story or you're writing your own press release and all that, if you keep all those in there, it's less questions that the media has to ask. It's less questions that the public has to ask when they hear this information or read or see this. If you have those answered, then you're probably going to get your message across. You should be able to provide visuals. In today's day and age, it's hard to get someone to sit down and read. Even, newspapers are full of photographs, their web pages are full of photographs or videos. And then of course with TV and then radio for sound, there's lots of ways, but it grabs more of the attention than just something that's in print that's harder to notice. So think about, can your event or what you want to highlight be photographed? Can it be recorded? And the need for visuals also depends on the importance of what's being said. So a press conference sometimes can be boring unless it's vital news that people know about. Then they're on the edge of their seats waiting to hear. If there is nothing huge, like if you don't have a huge event, and maybe just words are not enough, you need those visuals. But if it is something vital, then don't be showy with a whole bunch of videos and stuff if you just need to get verbiage out and say certain details for something very important, such as during COVID when we had to shut libraries down. Right to the point, no need for visuals, just state the name of what's happening. If you did it through an announcement somewhere, again, just the words were probably enough at that time period. So going back to our tools that we talked about when we're getting there. So now we've thought about all the things we want to possibly put into our story or the tools that we need. We've thought about all of this. Now is the press release. And so when you're crafting your press release, like I said, remember the 5 W's and the H, think of those things. There are templates available out there. If you are ever looking for, like, you're not sure how to write a press release or what to do in there, there's plenty of examples online that you could go to and all that. So I just provided one of ours that you can find on our website. Always feel free to look back at our DPI's website in their news media section, and all of our press releases are listed. But for ours, if you notice at the top, it says for immediate release, all in caps. And sometimes you'll see embargoed, but that's not really used anymore, and nobody really has to adhere to it if they don't want to. It was more of a professional courtesy in the past, and it's left over from the days of print when a newspaper was competing with radio and television, and it just gave them a little bit of an advantage because radio and TV can deliver the news instantly, whereas print would have to wait until their papers came out. So this kind of gave them a little bit of an advantage to help get the papers out at the same time that the news media would be announcing it. And so they would still be in competition. So that was the reason for the embargo before, where you'd say it couldn't go out until a certain time when you knew all the papers were going to be out. Now with websites and everything, every paper outlet usually has its own online presence, and so it's discussed there. But it still says for immediate release in case anyone is still looking or wondering when they can talk about this. Always have your date. And one of the other key things that you need to have on there is a contact. And it could be a person, or you could just have a generic thing like we have here where it says DPI media line with the phone number and an email address. Whatever is the easiest way and best way that someone's going to quickly respond if the media do contact this person. And so for us, we have multiple people that answer the media line. And so it's easier if it doesn't have a name on it and someone's not waiting for a particular person to respond back. But it needs to be people who know what they're doing and can answer the questions that might be asked. So that's why that number is there. So don't put anyone on there who might have to take a couple days to call back, might not be in the office all 5 days of the week, or something like that. Make sure that it's someone that can be readily reached. And then if you notice this press release, the way that I created this, and going back to the story that it said on a few slides ago, that mentioned talking about the ARPA funds and the great coverage that we got from WPR, part of the way I wrote it was, of course, the big headline is about the money that we received. So the $3 million, we granted $3 million in ARPA library pandemic relief funding, and we sent this information out, right? So getting into the libraries and helping with what's going on out there. And so one of those was the bookmobile. And to me, that was the most tangible. There's a lot of programs that were being happened, but you can't really touch and feel programs. You hear about it, but you can't see it until they actually happen. A bookmobile, someone can imagine in their heads exactly what that is. And so I knew that would kind of grab attention. And so that was one of the first things there. And then you see, like, by the second paragraph, I mentioned about how the $3 million was going to be split up, and it's awarded and distributed between 10 public libraries and 15 library systems. And so because of that, all those numbers got picked up, and I knew they would. You can't always guess, but I knew if this was going to be told, that was what somebody was going to go after fast. And so some numbers, you can't be super heavy in the numbers, but you're going to be telling the story and what's easy to digest from the average everyday public. And so this was something that it made it tangible. $3 million over the state. How is that going to be divided? Well, now when I say it's 10 libraries, 15 library systems, and I explained what that movie would be used for, lending libraries, outreach programs. And this press release goes into much more detail than what you see here on your screen, but it was split between 33 projects. And that is a little bit more understandable than if I just throw out $3 million. But then those are the only numbers. So we don't go into like heavy detail of stuff, because then it does get too hefty and weedy. And then that's when you lose everyone, when it's too heavy in numbers. So some other communication tools that we had, I mentioned, was social media. That's probably another key thing that your libraries do and that they're working on. So I just threw in here a social media calendar that sometimes we use. And you see the source there of Google Sheets Geeks. This is just one that I've seen. There's many others out there, or you can create your own in your own Excel spreadsheet or template, or even if it's handwritten on paper down below and you use that to go off of. It doesn't have to be fancy. This one I like just because it has whatever you might need for social media. We primarily at DPI use Facebook and Twitter, and some LinkedIn, but not Pinterest or TikTok or Instagram or any of those. So I could delete that. I could adjust this however I want. I can do it month by month, and I can see the whole year as I develop it if I want to. And then you can get so specific as to, you see on the left-hand side that it's Monday through Sunday. So every day of the week that you want to add things, and you can put the tweets right in there. Now we're a little bit different in DPI, whereas I can create this, but someone in our communications department separate from me then loads this, and they'll send out the social media, but we're intertwined with the education side of everything at DPI. So there's pieces that come and go here and there. So that's a little bit different than if I solely could do this just for library services, but we don't have that at DPI. We have an agency-wide social media presence, not one specific. And so that's where that is. So this is just one example of it. And this is where you can decide how many days a week, how often, how you want to switch up those messages between Facebook and Twitter. You want to keep it a little bit similar, but you want some of the verbiage to be a little different. And then you can make note of which images you want and all that, and keep track of everything here. And so this is just one way to help stay organized with that. And again, that's online for what I used for there. So develop that social media calendar and share that with the people who need that. And then there's also PSAs. Those are typically free. That's why they're public service announcements. They're free in radio and TV that you can write something. Usually it's as short as 10 seconds and no more than 1 minute of an announcement. You could write the script and a radio DJ will read it at certain hours of the day. A lot of times in TV, it's printed on a graphic when they do special PSAs throughout, like a newscast or something. Sometimes they're aired there to talk about events that are happening in your area. It's a simple way to also to promote an event in another way. And so that's just one other tool that you might be able to use. Press conferences are usually used for a larger event. If you have someone special coming to visit, let's say the first lady decides to come through your area and stops in the library and wants to talk about all the great things that libraries do, that is definitely going to turn into a press conference. So it might be something like that, where you would have it in your libraries. If there was some big announcement, you received a massive donation in the area and wanted to promote that and explain all the great ways you're going to use this newfound funding. We can all wish that that happens to every one of us. And how great would that be? But that might be a time for a press conference. Your library website is probably your strongest tool in your toolbox. I had already mentioned that earlier, of all the things and the ways that you can use your website, and it can connect everyone to the events that you're having at your library, but it can also connect you to resources that are outside of the library. So one of the big projects that I work on with DPI is with the LODS project. And so we've been promoting that throughout the state in a whole host of different ways. And one of which is with another PR firm, we created a marketing toolkit to supply to all the libraries throughout the state. And it's on our website if you haven't seen it yet. And within that, it has just graphics you can use for a button on your website. If you can't do anything more to connect your community to workforce assistance, is just a button that you can set up a link to and send your library users who are looking for information on job search and all that. And you put this graphic on your web pages with this link to jobcentersofwisconsin.com. And by doing that, it's one quick jump over there to a whole bunch of resources, which pretty much holds everything you could imagine to help yourself find a job and some of the other information you might need for workforce assistance. And so it's a great little tool, but it's highlighted there on websites, and your library's website could quickly use that. No matter what capacity you have in your library, it would take a few minutes to add that portion of it. You might also have blogs or newsletters that lets your community know all the great things that are happening, and maybe that goes out monthly, but just make sure you plan on that. And then, of course, marketing materials, which are all the things that are shown about your library to promote a certain area of books. You might have a display rack of certain materials that you want to highlight for the month. You might have a great, some of the trifolds that are up front, or posters, flyers, advertisements. Maybe you have a large enough budget, couldn't we all hope for this, is commercials to highlight something. You never know, but those are all the kind of marketing materials that you might have at your disposal to tell your story. So we've gone through what tools you might have to get the word and information out. So what's next? Start thinking about your big picture. What do you want your community to know about your library? What do you need your community to know? And how do they go about, using what you're talking about, the resources that you have, right? So you might start thinking about a communication strategy. So plan to communicate to a specific target audience. We had mentioned that earlier about thinking about who you want to talk to for a particular event, or who do you need to reach. So while you're thinking about your audience, create a press list. Think about your reporter names, the media outlets in the area, contact info. And that could be to newspapers, radio, television, online sites, blogs, could be other organizations. One of the things that I did for the ARPA funding is a lot of the funding came from IMLS for helping libraries. So I reached out when WPR promoted it. So it's a little bit different than the libraries. I didn't want to put it on our social media site. I mean, we still talked about the promotion of that on our site, but it was even better that the news outlet talked about the story. And so that's what I called IMLS and asked them, hey, can you retweet and repost what was sent from WPR? And I sent them the stories, and then they did. So not only was I letting their audience see all the great work we were doing, but IMLS was now aware of the great work that the Wisconsin libraries were doing. So it was kind of a twofold punch there of trying to get the word out of what we were doing there. So that's part of what we what we worked on there. So, but think about your press list. And it's okay that you don't know the people in your area. Over time, you'll build a relationship slowly but surely. So that's all right. You're also going to want to create your strategic communications plan and have a crisis communications plan. I could have a whole nother session on a crisis communications plan, so we won't get into that today. But I want to mention about the strategic communications plan. So you've been thinking about all this, your head's probably swirling on all the information I've already given you, figuring out a story to tell or multiple stories to tell, figuring out how to, what tools to use, how to tell that story. Do I need one tool, multiple tools, all of that? That's what's coming together in your communications plan. Now, what you see on your screen here is just a sample plan. You do not need to use this. This isn't something that I use. I actually just use a Word doc to help build mine. But if you're not sure where to start, there are so many templates and resources online that can help you. This particular one is from Social Bee. And so I just liked it quickly because it highlights thinking of your audience, thinking of your message, what tool you're going to use, so that media or your vehicle to get that communication out, that message out, the frequency, how often you're going to do this, the timing of it, who's responsible for it, because it's important to have a list of who does it, and then how you're going to get that feedback, how you're going to know about it, and whether it worked or not, because you always want to measure what you're communicating and if it was worth the effort that you put into it, or if there was a way to adjust to make sure that. So you need to determine how long you want this plan and all that, but choose something that fits best with your work. Don't hesitate to take a plan like this if you take from online and adjust it to make it fit your needs. Like I mentioned, I create my own Word doc, but I do research some helpful, for some helpful reminders or suggestions. So I don't forget an aspect of planning while I'm deep in the weeds with materials. Like as I'm piecing this together, sometimes it's easy to forget the key things. So you want to make sure that you at least do a longer term planning. And this can be done over a period of time. So as you're developing the strategic communications plan, I always say that you need to start slow and think. Remember, a strategic plan is an outline about how you're going to communicate important information to key stakeholders. And those stakeholders might be your community members, your board members, your legislators, other organizations in the area who you partner with. It could be any of those. So first and foremost, brainstorm the annual items you always promote or want people to know about. Identify the purpose of those communications, why you're doing it. And then align it to your mission and vision. If you don't have one, it's probably good to come up with one, to at least a mission of why you're doing the work that you're doing. But make sure that your communications follow that mission, because it's going to help you stay on that mission and apply those visions to your work if your communications plan also is highlighting it. It's another like checks and balances system that you are following along your own mission and vision. Okay. And then I always say, break it down. So if it is a year-long strategic communications plan, break it down monthly. That's probably the easiest way to do it. If you're going adventurous and you're going to go to a 5-year plan, maybe you break it down by year and then take each year at a time and break it down monthly. But like I said, I typically do 1 year. If maybe all you have the capacity to do is just plan communications for a specific project, then break it down week by week or day by day of what you need. That's all that you need for that. So just somehow break it down. And then you see on the slide 3 action items. It is so easy to over communicate and pick all these other little things you want to talk about. But I find it helpful to think about 3 things, just 3, no more, and think about what you want your audience to remember at the end of the year. If they don't remember anything else about your library or the work that you're doing, but they remember 3 things, what would they be? What do you most want people to remember? And so that's where the 3 action items come from, because that's what you want to center your communications around, are 3 ideas. Maybe it's your key purpose for the year is to get more of a certain age group physically walking into the library. And so your events, your communications should center around part of that for the work that you're doing, and highlight that and see if you can increase that, that group walking into your library. Maybe it's to increase circulation. Maybe that's what you want as a result of all of this work you're doing throughout the year. And so with your communication, you want to see that people are increasing their use of digital materials. And so that's what you're going to promote, are events, and create different times of the year where you highlight the usage and how people can access your digital materials, and try to increase that. And you'll know that you got there when you measure it and see that there's more people who are taking out some digital materials. They're checking those out. So do that. List what communication tools you're going to use for each of these communications. It might be one of them. Maybe all you do is a press release. More than likely, you're going to use multiple tools in the toolbox. So it'll probably be a press release. It will probably be social media. And then there might even be, you're going to probably send it to your listservs or email out to everyone. Might be in a newsletter as well. So there probably are multiple channels. You just want to make sure you remember that, because it's going to take time to piece all those together. Right. And then, of course, you want to plan the design of your message. Remember, you want to list who is responsible for each step of the work, whether it's, you have to have written messages. They may fall to one person. You might have photos that are given to another. Maybe you have one person that's dedicated to speaking to external, inquiries that come in. Write it down and make sure everyone's aware of what their role is. Okay. And then determine the frequency of your communication, like we mentioned with social media and all that. How often are you going to reach out to different groups? And then finally, your plan is never done. As much as work you're going to put into this, you're going to keep updating it through the year. You're going to determine if you need to add events or maybe cut back. Maybe it was too much. You're going to have other ideas to add to your plan. Should you start earlier in the year on a project? Should you start a little later? Should you use different communications tools than what you actually used this time? This is where you can review it and kind of take a step back and see what worked and what didn't work, and how you want to proceed for the next event or for the next year. So hopefully this was a good overview. I know it was quick and I probably threw a lot of information at you, but I am happy now to take any questions you might have. Or things that are working, that are stellar in your own libraries. Happy to hear those stories too. But I encourage you to ask whatever questions, and I'll have my information on the next slide after this. If you want to message me later, always feel free. I'm here to help. So thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you so much for that. It was excellent. I have a question, if you don't mind me jumping in, and it's
Sure.
about over communicating. What guidance do you offer? I can imagine it's different by platform, but let's talk email. Like, what is too much, do you think?
Good question. And I feel like email and social media are probably the two things that are over communicated. And it depends. Some are under communicated, but so for like kind of my rule of thumb, and it also still depends, because like during COVID, so much information was flying out. I don't think you could have over communicated. You needed to send information out. But then after a certain point, then people did not want to hear about COVID anymore. They just did not. It's like you just kind of shut down after a certain point, and you don't. But you need to make sure people are aware of certain things. So it's going, and so my answer probably is always going to be, it depends. But as a standard, I would say if you're doing newsletters, I always think that once a month for libraries is probably adequate. If you don't have that capacity, quarterly is perfectly fine, and I think it works just as well. Because people will be looking for that, right? They're going to want to know what's coming up in the next season of events, and so quarterly would also work, but monthly is probably the max I would do. If you have something that comes up in between those newsletters, that's when you would want to do some excess emailing to let people know what's happening or some interesting communication for your library. You could do that. And then again, with that, depending on who the audience is, I'm probably thinking you don't want to email more than once a week. and again, it depends on the audience, because you might have a stakeholder that needs certain updates at different times. So there might be a reason to not do that, but I would not go beyond once a week for something, because then at that point, you're inevitably going to get the person who doesn't have the time to open it. So they're going to save it for later. And we never get to those emails until later, unless you set a reminder to go back to it. It gets lost as soon as you scroll past it and it's not on your screen anymore. That email's not getting opened until someone calls you up and says, hey, did you see that email? And then you have to go back and find it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Use chat or feel free to unmute. All right, well, I don't see any questions coming in, but Beth, if you don't mind, I'd like to share your contact information with the follow-up with the recording. Is that, oh, there it is. Well,
Yep,
perfect.
there you go for everyone. And hopefully the quietness means that everyone is an expert and awesome and send out great stories. I would add that please feel free to send your success stories of your libraries to me. That's always something from DPI that we are looking for. We love to promote the work that you're doing. And whether that's in like a speech that the state superintendent is doing when she talks about libraries, whether it's our own work for the library services team, and we talk about the ways, and when we have to do annual reports and all of that. I know you guys all fill out your reports to send to us, but to have some key details of some tangible stories and visuals too, if you could send photos along, that's even better. But forward that to us. Let me know when there's certain social media and you'd like to get out. There's times where I can use it. I can't use everything, but it's always helpful to know all the great things they're doing. We try to stay on top of it all, but we don't always hear it, you know, and I pick up what I can when I read the news and find great stories across the nation, but and across Wisconsin, of course. I highlight all those things. That's how I find most of my information, but feel free to send it to me. And if you're ever struggling, thinking like, I'm not sure what to do, you can tap me as a resource. I am more than happy to go over. I love talking this stuff. Hopefully you can tell that today. This is like my favorite, is strategizing of how to get a message out. And I'm happy if you want to tap your brain, because I know there's not too many people out there who are, you know, who have this skill set. And maybe you're one of those who just needs another ear to like listen to and say, hey, you know, bounce some ideas off of. You can use me for that. Or if you're not sure of how to do it and you're like, I don't know where to even begin, I'm okay with those calls and emails too. Happy to help in any way.
Thanks, Beth. There's a suggestion in the chat too to do something on crisis communication in the future, which we always, you know, you said you could do a whole thing at the beginning, so maybe we'll hold you to that.
I can. And you know what's funny is, so I worked in the governor's office, and you'd think that's where I would have probably done the most crisis communications. And it was honestly DPI where I've done more than I've ever done in my life. And I've always most of my crisis communications ahead of time was always the stuff of planning to avoid crises. DPI, while we had some of those plans in place, we had lots of crises, and that's what was so sad, because we have like difficult stories. COVID, of course, was one of them, but school shootings and all that. There's a lot that you have to prevent and work on. And so that's why I am always happy to talk crisis communications as more of a preparation to help libraries prepare and plan of, you know, have their plan for when things might fall south and you need to get things in order fast, because like anything else, when you're flying at the speed of lightning to get things done, you're going to drop balls. There's just no way around it when you're at such high stress levels. So to have it planned in place is great, which is why I also do the strategic comms plan too. You've got so much on your plate. If you can sit down and organize this over a time period, a short time period, and piece it together, at least a plan of attack for the year, then it'll help you when you're in the thick of things and you got 15 things on your plate and it's like, all right, what's coming up next month? And then you can see it ahead of time and know, and then it's not all last minute, and it's helpful to manage it.
Yeah, thank you. Better to be proactive than reactive, right?
Yeah, it does. It'll save you time in the end. It doesn't seem like it at the moment that you're doing it, but it will. I promise. Right. It does help you save time in the end.
Right. Well, Beth, thank you so very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. I will share the recording of this session shortly, and you'll also be able to find it on the WiLS website. I am going to do a quick little plug for the next WiLSWorld Shorts, which is coming up on December 2nd, and we're doing kind of an overview of what WiLS does. We find that a bunch of our members use us for one or two very specific services, but aren't quite aware of the full suite of services that we provide. So save the date, go to the website and register if you like. December 2nd at 1 p.m. We'll be back with our next WiLSWorld Shorts. And again, thank you so much, Beth, for sharing your wisdom with us. And thank you to everybody online for attending. Reach out to either me or Beth with questions, and we'll be happy to follow up. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. It's Friday.